combustible conflict. The gloves come off in last night's NBC News Democratic presidential debate. We have a report and analysis. Taking charge. President Donald Trump appoints a new head for the 17 U.S. spy agencies. Fight for the unborn. A preview of 2 pro-life measures being considered next week in the Senate. And good to know you. Pope Francis tells us why it is so important to build a relationship with Jesus. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, February 20th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Democratic presidential candidate Mike Bloomberg made his debate debut last night. The billionaire businessman took a pounding from the other candidates on the stage. The contenders are now shifting into survival mode as they'll soon face tests from voters in both Nevada and South Carolina. Wednesday's NBC News debate in Las Vegas was a first for Mike Bloomberg.
This was Michael Bloomberg finding what it's like to be the center of the attacks.
And Senator Elizabeth Warren contributed to the fiery first hour.
He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements?
He was also a bit shaky when pushed on when he would release his tax returns, saying he's very wealthy and these kinds of things take time. It's a very similar argument to what we initially heard from Donald Trump.
Look, I'll support whoever the Democratic nominee is, but understand this. Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another.
Bernie Sanders attacked Bloomberg for his personal fortune.
Mike Bloomberg owns more wealth than the bottom 125 million Americans. That's wrong. That's immoral.
Pete Buttigieg also accused Bloomberg of trying to buy the Democratic Party and Bernie Sanders of threatening to burn it down with his socialist proposals.
We could wake up 2 weeks from today, the day after Super Tuesday, and the only candidates left standing will be Bernie Sanders and Mike Bloomberg, the 2 most polarizing figures on this stage.
Today, Bloomberg said the debate concerns him.
Look, the real winner in the debate last night was Donald Trump. Because I worry that we may very well be on the way to nominating somebody who cannot win in November. And if we choose...
Phillip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press, joins us now from Las Vegas. Phillip, thanks for joining us. As we mentioned, former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg made his debut on the debate stage last night. Many said that he really didn't do so well. What's your take on that?
No, he didn't do all too well. His campaign, though, is saying that they're relatively happy with his performance, and the simple fact that he hadn't been on a debate stage for a very long time did mean that he managed to find his feet in the second half of this debate, but that doesn't mean that the first half wasn't excruciating for the former mayor of New York City. He was attacked from all sides. In the end, it was Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts who got in the very first attack right off the get-go, but every candidate on stage had their go at Mike Bloomberg on all sorts of topics. Take your pick, essentially, on past racist and sexist comments, also on the simple fact that he is a billionaire like President Donald Trump. And then, maybe most importantly, these are candidates who are really unhappy with how Mike Bloomberg has been doing his campaigning, essentially. He has foregone doing any campaigning in the early states, including here in Nevada, instead concentrating entirely on spending his $400 million on TV adverts so that he can get as good a result as possible on Super Tuesday on the 3rd of March. Those are the tactics used by Mike Bloomberg, and they don't really go down well with the rest of the contenders.
Yeah, I mean, it really was quite the debate. The gloves really came off. Do you expect that tone to continue in the future debates?
Well, because of the urgency that we now have in this race, I think that's probably what's going to happen. We've now had 9 debates out of a total of 12, so 3 more to come. The next one already next week in South Carolina, when presumably these 6 candidates will be on stage again together. There's a reason for this tension, for this aggression on stage. First of all, the Nevada caucuses are coming up on Saturday. Some of those candidates on stage, including, for example, former Vice President Joe Biden, really need to get a good result here, where there's a very different demographic voting compared to Iowa and New Hampshire. And then there are national polls that keep on coming out and that show that Bernie Sanders is the front runner nationally and in many of the states that will be voting over the next few weeks, meaning that anybody who can will be trying to get a tax in on him, though that wasn't as much the case last night. Everybody was concentrating on Mike Bloomberg. That's why Bernie Sanders can be seen as one of the winners of this debate here last night. He was attacked too, but not as much as Mike Bloomberg was, meaning that he comes out of this again as a bit of a winner and still the front runner nationally and in many of the states coming up.
Well, you talked about Joe Biden, and we talked about him yesterday and how he really did need to make an impact. What do you think of his performance last night?
Well, the feeling you get with the former vice president is that he never really quite gets going. He is, after all, the former vice president. He has campaigned many times before. He has been a presidential candidate before. He knows the debate stage, but he still doesn't have that 100% convincing performance. And that, again, was not the case yesterday. Sometimes he disappeared from the stage, didn't really partake when everybody else might have been shouting. He was a little bit quieter than others. The reason why we look toward the former vice president so much is because he was, after all, the clear front runner when he entered this race at the very beginning. And things are getting a little bit difficult for him because he had those really bad results in Iowa, a 4th place finish there, a 5th place finish in New Hampshire. This is a state, Nevada, where he really wants to do well because of a large Latino community. And then next week in South Carolina, he truly has to do well because that is where a majority of African American voters will be having their say in the primary there. And that really is a must-win state for Joe Biden. That's why things are getting a little bit tense in his campaign and also on stage, of course.
Well, Philip, thank you so much. Great to see you again.
Pleasure.
3 years and 4 months. That is how long Roger Stone will spend in prison. Stone was convicted of lying to Congress in the Russia probe. Prosecutors pushed for a sentence of 7 to 9 years. Today, the judge said Stone's crimes demanded hard time, but 7 to 9 was excessive. The case prompted a mini revolt inside the Justice Department when President Trump also pushed for a lighter sentence for his former confidant. President Donald Trump announces Richard Brunel, the current U.S. ambassador to Germany, will become acting director of national intelligence. Brunel will be in charge of the nation's 17 spy agencies. Correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, Democrats are questioning Brunel's credentials. As the acting director, he will not have to be confirmed by the Senate. And in his new role, Brunel becomes the first openly gay member of President Trump's cabinet. President Trump revealed the news on Twitter, writing, "I am pleased to announce that our highly respected ambassador to Germany, Richard Brunel, will become the acting director of national intelligence. Rick has represented our country exceedingly well, and I look forward to working with him." News of the announcement was quickly criticized by Democrats who said the job should be held by someone with deep experience in intelligence.
I think that based on my experience in the Armed Services Committee, that he has to justify, and he has the burden of proof on whether he should be confirmed.
But in an acting position, Brunel will not have to be Senate confirmed. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, said the intelligence community deserves stability and an experienced individual to lead them in a time of massive national and global security challenges. Brunel previously served as U.S. spokesman at the United Nations in the George W. Bush administration, including under then-Ambassador John Bolton. He replaces Joseph Maguire, who has been acting National Intelligence Director since August. The president tweets, "I would like to thank Joe Maguire for the wonderful job he has done, and we look forward to working with him closely, perhaps in another capacity within the administration." President Trump is still on his West Coast tour. He holds a rally tonight in Colorado Springs and then one tomorrow night in Las Vegas before returning here to the White House. Tracy?
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Mark. New threats emerge in the coronavirus outbreak while Chinese health officials are expressing new optimism. The confidence voiced by China's government came as it reported a reduced number of new infections, but doubts remain about the true trajectory of the epidemic since China changed its method of counting cases. New threats have emerged outside of the country. South Korea has now urged its 2.5 million residents to stay inside. Hundreds of people in Portugal rally against a plan to legalize euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide for terminally ill people. The country's parliament has voted in favor of the measures, but they may be blocked by Portugal's president. The protesters chanted yes to life, and some held up religious symbols. Portugal is a majority Catholic country.
نحن جلسنا مع السيد الرئيس وناقشنا.
South Sudan's rival leaders announced that they have agreed to form a coalition government just 2 days before the deadline, a breakthrough after months of delays and a major step in the emergence from a 5-year civil war. President Salva Kiir is expected to name opposition leader Riek Machar as his first vice president or top deputy. The Catholic Bishops' Conference of India has re-elected its leader. Cardinal Oswald Gracious is set to serve a second term. The Archbishop of Bombay just turned 75 years old. In accordance with canon law, he has submitted his resignation to the Pope, but he is expected to continue in his current role for the foreseeable future. Cardinal Gracious is a member of the Council of Cardinal Advisors to the Holy Father. The Vatican will soon open the archives of Pope Pius XII from the World War II period.
Finally, we will see what the Pope really taught, because they said a lot about it, and there was written a lot about it, without having the documents. So it's really the happy hour.
Johan Eeks, historical archivist of the Section for Relations with States of the Holy See's Secretary of State, says the Pope made a generous gesture by opening the archives earlier than expected. More than 150 historians and researchers have signed up to access the archives on March 2nd. Critics say Pope Pius XII stayed silent during the Holocaust, while Vatican supporters are saying he used quiet diplomacy that encouraged convents and other religious institutions to hide Jews. A new Interfaith documentary is focusing on human trafficking in the Mediterranean region. The documentary, called Wells of Hope, tells the human trafficking stories of women from Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. The project was created by Christian and Muslim women to raise awareness of the exploitation of women and children. The release comes days before Pope Francis visits Bari. He will attend a meeting for peace in the Mediterranean on Sunday. Lia Beltrami, director of Wells of Hope, joins us now from Rome. Lia, thanks for joining us. So what inspired you to create this documentary?
So in the last years, I dedicated almost all my life trying to find hope in the darkest places, and starting from the gospel, try to bring a traveler of hope in some ways. And so I'm trying to follow quite a lot the human trafficking ways in the world. We have been to Thailand and to Ethiopia, and now in the Mediterranean, in the Arabic region. And there I found extraordinary women working together, try to create awareness against the human trafficking. And so I said, let's kind of, in the Bible, root. So let me follow the path of root and try to say what I see and to present what I've seen there.
Lia, I know doing a film about human trafficking, that can be a pretty dangerous task. Did you face any challenges with this film?
Yes, it was really very hard to film because we couldn't film too many things and we couldn't go in so many places. So we decided to walk almost hidden, like kind of mixing in the touristic people and try to go and get all the informations we could. Then we found ourselves very, very near some very bad situation in the Syrian conflict. So we could go away from that place. And so we decided then to use more symbolic images that we could use. So it was, we didn't put again in danger, and we went on trying to focus. Then we had some problems, of course, in the refugee communities. And yes, I mean, you need to have your guardian angels to make this work.
Well, I know Pope Francis is going to attend a meeting on peace in the Mediterranean in Bari this upcoming weekend. What would you like to see come out of that meeting?
I hope it's very important what's happening in Bari and to see all the bishops united together. I've spoken to some of them trying to say, please help all the nuns, but not only the nuns, all the women that are working, women and men working together on the floor to stop the human trafficking, because it's a reality much more present than we think. And we need the help, and we need to feel part of the church and not to feel alone in this battle.
Well, Lia, thank you so much, and thank you for what you're doing. Lia Beltrami, Director of Wells of Hope. Thanks again.
Thank you very much to you and to all the people there.
Coming up, analysis on whether Democrats are reaching out to pro-lifers. A Democratic senator from Alabama refuses to answer a question on whether abortion should be banned after 5 months. The Daily Caller reports Doug Jones was asked if he supports abortion after 20 weeks. He answered by saying, quote, "Should abortion be banned? What a stupid question." The Senate is set to vote on 2 pro-life bills next week. Joining me now is Catherine Hadro, host of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Catherine, welcome back.
It's so good to be with you, Tracy.
We're so glad you're here. So we just heard the Senate is expected to vote next week on 2 pro-life bills. What do you know about these bills, and do you think they'll pass?
Yes, so Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is really making the pro-life issue a priority by scheduling these votes, and we are expecting them early next week. Let's break down what these 2 bills are, because they're really common sense. So there's the Born Alive bill and the Pain Capable bill. The Pain Capable bill would ban abortions after 5 months of pregnancy. Why? Because that's when science indicates that's when unborn babies can feel pain. This is a common sense law in line with a lot of American attitudes, and we're hopeful, we'll see how senators vote on that. The second bill is the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. This actually has nothing to do with abortion whatsoever. This is simply about the lives of babies who are born following an abortion, babies who survive an abortion, and it would mean that they receive the necessary medical care that they deserve. Are we expecting them to pass? Well, they need 60 votes. So we're not too optimistic they will pass, but it's important we get a vote so we see where these senators stand on these issues.
Well, Senator Jones is a Democrat, and you talk to a lot of pro-lifers on your show. What are we hearing about the fight for life among Democrats?
Yes, well, last night was the 9th Democratic debate. I was able to watch all of it, and abortion actually didn't come up at all. But it's important to know that every single Democratic presidential candidate is extreme when it comes to abortion. Something I want to highlight for our viewers is that while this was the 9th Democratic debate, it was the first time that former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg made it to the stage. Former Republican turned Democrat, really poising himself as this moderate, but it's important to note he is not moderate when it comes to abortion. He has said he believes abortion is a fundamental human right. His foundation has donated millions to Planned Parenthood. There are reports of pregnancy discrimination. So while abortion did not come up last night during the debate, it is important to note every single candidate is extreme on this issue.
Yeah, so are any of the Democratic presidential candidates, are they reaching out to pro-lifers, do you think, or trying to appeal to them in any way?
They're really sending mixed messages. There's really a divide we're seeing when it comes to this. So, for example, Pete Buttigieg, former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, said in a recent town hall on Fox News he would not amend the party's platform to reflect pro-life Democratic views. We had Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders also say that being pro-abortion is an essential part of being a Democrat. But last week, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar made comments on ABC's The View, basically saying she wants to welcome pro-life Democrats into the Democratic Party. Now, Amy Klobuchar has a 100% Planned Parenthood rating. She herself has historically voted very pro-abortion, so pro-lifers are critical of these comments. Is she just saying she just wants the pro-life votes? She's not necessarily going to take any pro-life action if she were in office. So again, we're seeing mixed messages. Again, every candidate is extreme on this issue, but they differ on how they message to potential pro-life voters.
Yeah, so it should be interesting to see what happens.
Yes, yes.
All right, quickly, before we wrap up, what's coming up on Pro-Life Weekly and anything new?
Yes, well, it's really exciting after 3 years of Pro-Life Weekly where viewers will notice a different look tonight when they tune in. And speaking of this conversation when it comes to Democrats and the pro-life issue, we're speaking with a very well-known pro-life Democrat, Congressman Dan Lipinski of Illinois. He tells us what it's like to be a pro-life Democrat in Congress today. We also speak with a Catholic professor who testified on Capitol Hill last week, and also a really endearing interview with Lia Darrow. So Lia Darrow is a former top model turned Catholic speaker and author and writer, and she's taking to social media to really create this pro-life social media movement. You'll hear all about it, and we'll even meet her newborn son. So really hope viewers tune in. I'm excited to hear what they think.
Yeah, excited to see it. Can't wait. So thank you so much again, Catherine. And you can watch Pro-Life Weekly tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. And make sure you visit EWTN.com for other airing times. Catherine, thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, what Pope Francis says about the power of education and why it's not always bad to be humiliated.
Si fece servo, umiliò se stesso.
Pope Francis says we should do everything in our power to get to know Jesus. At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says the best ways to do this are to attend Mass regularly and accept the path God has chosen for us, even if it includes humiliation or setbacks. Pope Francis says education has the power to create fraternal humanity.
L'educazione è un movimento inclusivo.
Addressing the Congregation for Catholic Education this morning, the Holy Father urged the group to unite efforts to form mature people. He defined education into two movements, ecological and inclusive, emphasizing that education brings people to light. He reminded the congregation about its important duty to promote a day for the Global Educational Pact, which will be celebrated on May 14th. The New Orleans Saints football team is headed to court to try and block the release of emails detailing the work it did for church leaders. The team gave public relations advice to the area's Catholic Archdiocese in its response to the clergy sexual abuse crisis. Lawyers for 24 abuse victims say the Saints joined the Archdiocese of New Orleans in concealing misconduct. The Saints strongly deny the claim, as do officials from the Archdiocese. Joining us now to discuss this case is Doug Eldridge, a nationally recognized sports agent and strategic public relations advisor. Doug, welcome back to the show. So I guess my question to you is it common for religious organizations to seek help, public relations help that is, from a professional sports team?
To seek outside counsel and advice in terms of the messaging, the means by which you communicate your position? Absolutely. From a sports team per se, probably not. But I think when you dig a layer deeper, you understand the underlying connection and bridge that had long since been built between the Benson family, the owners of the Saints, and the Archdiocese there in New Orleans. Nationally, I think roughly 23% of the United States identifies as Catholic. New Orleans, over 36%. It's an incredibly devout populace down there. And the Bensons have a long-standing, very, very tight relationship with the Archdiocese. So when you step back and actually look at some of the underlying facts, it makes a little bit more sense that they would go to their senior leadership for advice.
Doug, do you think this case makes it harder for religious groups to receive public relations advice from outside groups?
Yes and no. I would say that public relations, broadly speaking, is a thread that's woven through the fabric of American life. On the corporate side, on the philanthropic side, on the crisis communication side, you name it. Again, it's the means by which we connect our message and our modality with the broader consumer public. So I don't think this is going to damage that process by any stretch, but I do think it's getting a certain level of heightened attention and scrutiny.
Yeah, in your opinion, how do you think this is all going to play out?
Well, I don't know. Look, there's a difference. I was joking before I came out. It's hard to believe. I graduated law school 15 years ago, and I still remember the discussion about privilege versus private communications, like what classifies as which. All these years later, the move to say that this is privilege doesn't qualify because it's not between the attorney-client or the doctor-patient, any one of the small subset. This is private, however, between a private organization, the Saints, and the archdiocese, right? However, as the Associated Press is arguing in their supporting brief, the public concerns outweighs the privacy interests of the saints and their staff. So, in that context, I think both sides, most assuredly the saints, have a vested interest to ensure that this case is not tried in the court of public opinion, because mounting pressure would certainly lead to ultimately the dissemination, and with that, the selective grabbing of salacious lines, which might take the broader discussion out of context. All of that is to say, I'm not sure moving forward, but I think both sides certainly have their vested interest to protect and promote their case accordingly.
And Doug, if you don't mind, I'd like to switch gears a little bit. As you know, spring training started for baseball.
Sure.
The Houston Astros were found to have cheated during their run back in 2017 for the World Series title, and again the following year. For those who may not be familiar, can you kind of take us through all that, what happened, and really what that means for baseball?
In simplest form, sign stealing in baseball, meaning the sign that is communicated from the catcher to the pitcher, the selection of the pitch that's going to be thrown. Trying to steal those signs is as old as a pitcher and a batter. Where it gets complicated is when you implement technology to try and steal and communicate those signs. And that's ultimately what happened. That was very much the mix of digital and analog. They had a camera in center field, but then it was communicated to people adjacent to the dugout, and then actually banged on a Rubbermaid trash can, some type of pseudo-Morse code to communicate to the batter what the pitch was going to be. It sounds silly, but here's the problem. This was used during a year that they ran all the way up to and brought home the World Series title. So it has broader implications. The bigger concern for baseball, which is on the heels of, in the 80s, the Pete Rose gambling issue, in the late 90s, the steroid issue, now this, the concern is it cheating the game? Is it cheating and defrauding the system at its core? And while I'll let others, debate the underlying merits of that argument, the real problem has been the way, again, the whole conversation comes back to public relations. That's why I say it was the thread. The bigger problem is how this has been messaged and managed. Because if it was simply brought to the public and said, this is what the accusation was, this is what our investigation found, this is the punishment that we're implementing accordingly, but more important, these are the measures that we're taking moving forward to ensure that nothing like this happens, it wasn't in that A, B, C, D straight line communication, and it's what it allowed to happen was echo chambers and pockets to form. And now public sentiment has filled that, and it's sentiment largely driven by disappointment and disdain and outrage from other players to fans, and most assuredly media have sought their proverbial pound of flesh. And so it's a series of missteps, and I think the way they have messaged this is arguably just as damaging as the actual alleged cheating at the heart of the matter. So where this goes moving forward, I think it'll be interesting to see, because there's a similar case that's going to come down the pipe here shortly with the Red Sox. We'll see if they're treated the same way.
All right, Doug, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We are back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.